See You Now is a podcast highlighting the innovative and human-centered solutions that nurses are coming up with to solve for today's most challenging healthcare problems. Created in collaboration with Johnson & Johnson and the American Nurses Association and hosted by nurse economist and health tech specialist Shauna Butler.
We started learning very early on that there's the theory of clinical practice and then there's the reality of clinical practice. And nurses are at the front line of that.
I immediately saw the gap that a robot assistant to nurses could fill. And I knew that as soon as we got the robot into the environment with nurses, that nurses would figure out that use case.
Welcome to See You Now. I'm Linda Benton. And today I'm thrilled to be back to introduce another conversation in our Meeting of Minds series, where we ask CNOs to choose someone they want to connect with from inside or outside of the nursing profession, to talk about how they are partnering to drive innovation forward, to tackle some of the most difficult problems in healthcare, and to create environments where nurses are leading and creativity is thriving. This is a critical moment for our healthcare system and for the nursing workforce. Healthcare demands and pressures for efficiency continue to rise. There is also a shift in the nursing workforce as a significant portion of experienced baby boomer nurses already have or are expected to retire, taking years of working knowledge with them. And while we are seeing an increase in applicants from nursing schools across the U.S., many nursing schools at the same time are struggling to expand capacity. As a result, we expect nursing shortages to occur in some areas of the country, and soon the majority of the nursing workforce will be newer nurses with less institutional knowledge and practical experience. On top of it all, the COVID pandemic has already stretched staffing to extreme limits. Workload and staffing challenges are raising the stress level of many nurses, impacting job satisfaction and driving some nurses to leave the profession altogether. When highly trained nurses are frequently tasked with logistical demands such as searching for needed supplies, finding medications, tracking down equipment, and documenting on top of caring for patients, finding time to innovate and improve workflows is challenging. These smaller tasks take them away from the very thing that brought them into a career in nursing, caring for patients. In this Meeting of the Minds episode, we meet a chief nurse executive whose bold vision and love for the nursing profession is such that he is changing the game and driving partnerships far beyond healthcare, in this case, in robotics. Let me be clear. Moving robotics into nursing is not about replacing nurses, but it is about giving time back, increasing efficiency, reducing nurse burnout, and helping refocus nurse time and expertise in direct patient care, where they are needed most. What I also love about this story is how this specific nursing executive is positioning nurses as leaders in this collaboration, making space for and supporting innovation, and inspiring others to do the same.
I'm Andrea Tomas. I'm CEO and co-founder of Diligent Robotics in Austin, Texas.
I'm David Marshall. I'm proud to be a nurse, and I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Vice President and Chief Nurse Executive at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, California. I met Andrea back in, 2018. I got an email from Bonnie Clipper, who at the time was the Vice President of Innovation for the American Nurses Association. And she told me about a company in Austin, Texas that was developing robots that would be able to assist nurses. The idea really intrigued me. And so I said, sure, I'd be really happy to meet with the founder of the company. That's how Andrea and I first met.
I was just so intrigued that the VP of Innovation for the American Nursing Association was attending South by Southwest. And we had just launched the company. And I thought, this person is going to be the right person for me to talk to about our product and what we're doing. So I met Bonnie, we had tacos, and David, you were one of the first people on her list. She was like, the people you need to talk to that are really bringing innovation to nursing, David Marshall is one of the first. And that was absolutely true, because I remember the first time we had a phone call I was, pretty nervous, just kind of learning how to talk about what we thought Moxie could do for nursing. And we went through our whole spiel, and you were just like, you had me at robot, let's go. And so it was really fun.
We've known since around 2010 that nurses may only spend about 20 to 35% of their shift in actual patient care. The rest of the time, they're swamped with tasks like finding medications, tracking down equipment, tracking down supplies, documenting. So I immediately saw the gap that a robot assistant to nurses could fill. And I knew that as soon as we got the robot into the environment with nurses, that nurses would figure out that use case. And they would suggest other ways that it could be used to support them, to support their colleagues. And that's how it worked when we got you into the hospital, as I remember.
I came to this with an idea of how we could solve problems in hospitals. But my background has always been in research with robotics and how do you get robots and humans to interact together. So for a lot of years in academia, I was a professor at UT Austin. And that's what we did, was bring people into our lab and see like, well, how should we program the robot to have the best interactions? And so we really kind of just took that same mentality in 2018 when we were first trying to understand what our product was for and how it was going to be useful, and said, well, if we want to figure out how robots should help nurses, we have to get robots out there with nurses. It's a testament to the innovative nursing spirit to find people that are willing to play with the technology. And we were kind of overwhelmed with how supportive people were with the idea of just like, oh yeah, I'll try it. Oh, that's cool. What if it did this? And I think that's exactly what you need in order to find the really great use cases.
Tell me how you got interested in robotics.
I actually got interested in robotics later in my career than I think most people think. I think people are usually surprised to learn that I wasn't like building robots in kindergarten, or I was not the president of my robotics club. I was captain of my dance team. And so I didn't get into robotics until college and grad school. I was always interested in math and science, so I did engineering. And through my engineering undergrad, I got really interested in programming computers and computer science, which led me to really set off and try to build a career in artificial intelligence. And I had always been thinking about that from a software perspective, but when I got to grad school at MIT, I joined a lab where they were building social robots and the artificial intelligence software to make robots be socially appropriate and socially intelligent and socially accepted. And I just never looked back. I find it so fascinating to think about all the ways that the small behaviors that the robot makes, and you have to make an algorithm that decides 60 times a second where the robot's going to be looking and why. And it's fascinating because if you make small changes to that algorithm, it completely changes how people perceive what the robot's thinking and where the robot's going to go. And so all of these things make it really important for how well the robot can fit into the environment. And what we found in putting robots into hospitals and healthcare environments is, this is a really high stakes environment, right? So having the robot be able to fit into the environment and be appropriate and not be something that people feel like they don't understand, or I don't know what that robot's going to do, that comfort and seamlessly fitting into the environment becomes even more important.
It brings me to the thought, how similar to humans do you think robots should become?
We want to make sure that the robot's behavior is really reflective of its capability. A lot of the robots that I've built in my career, and Moxie is a good example of this. So Moxie is a mobile robot. It has an arm and it has storage containers and it has a social presence, and it's able to learn a map of the environment. And then you can send it from any point-to-point deliveries. So if you're on a nursing unit and you need to send a lab sample down to the lab, that's just one of the many things that Moxie is doing today to give that time back to the nursing staff so they can focus on patient care. So we don't have Moxie speak full English sentences. And that's because currently speech recognition makes mistakes a lot of the time. And so it's important to us that we make sure that the robot doesn't put off that vibe, that you're going to be able to come up to it and start talking about the weather. So I think that's true with everything. So if you make the robot really look like an android human, then people are going to expect that level of adult human intelligence in that robot versus if you make the robot a different kind of creature, then you don't have that expectation. So I think it's good for robotics if people have the expectation that, maybe this is as smart navigating the environment as a dog would be. If there was a dog running around the hospital, like that, they would kind of know how to go through doors and follow people, but wouldn't necessarily be able to hold full conversations.
I remember when we first brought Moxie into the hospital, and Moxie has characteristics that are sort of endearing. I remember that a patient met Moxie, and the patient was anxious prior to surgery, and the patient actually asked if Moxie could come back and visit her the next day after her surgery.
Because I remember that.
Because they had like a little bond that developed between them. But Moxie does have endearing characteristics, is what I call them, that make you want to have your picture with Moxie, and it's really fascinating to me.
Well, and I remember we actually were surprised at how much patient interaction there was and how much interest there was from the patients themselves, because we had been so focused on nursing support and workflows, and we didn't really have a strong part of the design around interactions with patients, because our focus was on, well, we want to make the nurses more available to interact with patients. But especially on an ambulatory unit, there's a lot of times that patients are walking around the hallways and they just got a real kick out of seeing a robot in the hall with them.
We define the patient experience as the sum of all interactions when the patient first thinks they need healthcare until they don't need healthcare anymore. And that interaction was part of that sum. The biggest immediate use I saw for robotic assistance for nurses was to free nurses up to spend time with their patients. And after this last year of COVID-19, the American Nurses Foundation did a study in December and found that 72% of the nurses that responded to the survey reported that they were exhausted. And so what role do you think Moxie will end up playing in supporting nurses in healthcare environments, specifically hospitals, but outside of hospitals too, where a lot of nursing care is moving?
The role that robots can play is really in giving that time back. How do we think about work and kind of redefining the work that has to happen in terms of logistics of how things get from point A to point B? Even before the pandemic, I had a couple of great conversations with deans of nursing schools, and I was talking with them about, what do you think about the nursing shortage and why, as you're thinking about preparing the next generation of nurses, how does the nursing shortage and the burnout epidemic, when you look at the field, what do you think that's coming from? And a couple of different perspectives came in saying that they thought it had a lot to do with leaving work left undone, that the most stressful part of the day for a nurse can be if you're leaving and you feel like you haven't had the time to do everything you needed to do for your patients. That's the real opportunity that I like to focus on. How can we use robots and automation to make sure that you're not wasting time running to lab or running to pharmacy or running to central supply to get something? You get to stay on your unit. You get to be focused on your patients. And then at the end of your shift, you feel like you didn't leave any work undone.
I had really tried my career to create places where nurses could be innovative and creative and be open to new ideas about how to do things. And that's one of the primary roles of a chief nursing officer today, is to create that environment. And before you came into the hospital with Moxie, we had been on a journey with another group where we opened the first makerspace in a hospital in the US and brought in 3D printers and laser cutters. And we used to say that the 3D printers brought people in, but the laser cutters kept them coming back. But that was part of our effort to free nurses up. You've worked with some outstanding chief nursing officers who have created these kinds of environments. What do you think makes it work in those places where they've gotten it right?
No, it's a really good point. I think some of the innovative hospitals that we're working with, they're really saying, look, we know that there's got to be ways that we can use technology to make sure that we're giving people space to work at the top of their license, to use their creativity and have that time to really focus. And so I think it is about, really being reflective. And a lot of times what we've seen is you select an innovative unit or an innovative nurse champion that's going to be the leading edge of the effort. Then you get to test things out in one location and just let it spread from there. I had a question for you along those lines. In your mind, when you think of like, oh, this unit would be a great innovation unit to try this innovation, what are some of the qualities that you think stand out to you when you're thinking about those nurse champions that are going to be kind of helping you drive some of these innovative ideas?
I try to think of a unit where there's a sense of celebration a lot of the time. So units where they've created contests around something that they want to improve, like patient experience. If they had a patient experience goal that they wanted to improve and they initiated an effort to improve it and then they celebrated the successes, I look for those kinds of units because it's not every unit that does that. And so usually there's a little bit of enthusiasm around what's going on that unit. That's sort of how I go about it.
And I have to go back to the makerspace. Tell me more about how you came up with that idea or how that came to you. And how did you even explain that to your hospital leadership at the time? You're like, hey, I want to buy some 3D printer.
Yeah, so actually it was an email from Cole Edmondson, a chief nursing officer in Dallas at the time. And Cole said, hey, there's going to be some engineers from MIT in the Houston area tomorrow, and they're interested in talking to nurses who might be interested in designing prototypes. So I immediately said, yeah, that sounds really interesting. So the next day, Jose Gomez Marquez and Anna Young from MIT showed up, and we had about 30 nurses in the room, and there's a lot of enthusiasm in the room for what they were doing. They had been to South America. They thought they would go to South America and find out how physicians were innovating products there to help their patients. And what they found was it was the nurses who were really the innovators, and they wanted to come back and see if that was the same in the US. So we engaged with them. We had a couple of wins. We had a nurse who started working in our cardiac catheterization lab, and they were doing catheterizations through the radial artery, which is in the wrist. And she was being trained in the cath lab to prop the arm up on a stack of towels. And she goes, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. So coming into the makerspace, she designed a rest for the arm to hold the arm in position for that procedure. That small win created so much enthusiasm and optimism around this makerspace that it wasn't difficult to get support, and it just grew from there.
What you created with the makerspace is actually just an extension of what nurses are doing every day in their everyday job from what we can see. And I think that's what we started learning very early on, is that there's the theory of clinical practice and then there's the reality of clinical practice, and nurses are at the front line of that. And so we would come in and we're having initial conversations with a few different people at a hospital about what are the opportunities for automation, or what are some of the optimizations or some of the workflows that might make sense. And you'll get some kind of a general description like, oh, we should think about the way that lab specimens are moving around. But it's not until you actually talk to the frontline nurses that you really understand the day-to-day experience. What we learned from a product perspective is we started to be just really open to not coming to nursing teams with a description of, this is exactly what Moxie does, but more of an opportunity. Like, here are some of the things that Moxie has done at other locations, but what we see every time we deploy in a new location is that the things that you're spending time running around the hospital doing may be different than in another location. So we're always, really trying to get that creative spirit going. It's been key to really find those nurses that get excited about inventing the future of their practice.
I love the iterative nature of it. And one idea generates another idea. And I think it's really part of the nursing process: assessment, planning, intervention, and evaluation. So you assess the situation, you plan what you're going to do about it, you select an intervention, and then you evaluate how it worked. And that's the nursing process. But I think it becomes, after you finish nursing school, that's the way you sort of approach everything in life.
Yeah. And robotics technology that's available today compared to many years ago is focused on that adaptability. And that makes it actually possible to have a robot that can be deployed and adapted, as opposed to a robot that has to be deployed and you have to decide on day one where the magnetic tape is going to go and exactly what line the robot's going to follow. And it used to be that if you were automating something in a hospital or a warehouse, you had to make all of those decisions in advance. And it's very hard to change it after the fact versus state-of-the-art robotics technology. This kind of next generation of robots that we're able to bring to hospitals now is able to be much more adaptable. And I think it's just so much more well suited to that iterative changing environment. Having a system that is helping you transport things, it's very important for that system to be adaptable when you're in this kind of really dynamically changing environment. One example, we saw a lot of hospitals that had Moxi installed during the pandemic. They were able to have that kind of adaptability in their workflows.
I think that's where the partnership is required, from the people who know what the clinical issues are to the people with the knowledge of how to make processes and AI and drones and robots work is so important. How, in that rapidly changing environment of COVID, how did you teach Moxi where PPE was going to be that day or that afternoon where it had been somewhere else that morning?
Yeah, we kind of made that learning really early on that wow, exactly what Moxi is going to do might actually need to change. So I'll say a little bit more about how Moxi knows where to go, but you take Moxi on a tour of the hospital and you sort of tell Moxi through an iPad interface, these are the important locations that you might be asked to take things to and from. And that interface we made very adaptable and very easy to kind of take Moxi on a second tour and say like, oh, I forgot to tell you about the lab, and here's the lab. And now you can take things back and forth to the lab. And so in the pandemic, we were able to allow the hospital to basically kind of take Moxi on another tour and say, hey, this is not how things work anymore. You know, the PPE used to be here and now it's over there. And you only have to tell Moxi one time. And now Moxi always goes to the right place to grab PPE and take it out to people. And so that sort of adaptability is something we had learned from those early days in our research trials. And it really showed its value in recent months in particular.
Explain a little bit about that linen project that we had and how much Moxi can carry as far as weight.
Yeah, that was a really interesting part of our research trials where we identified large bags of linen that were just needing to be carried. And we noticed that so many of the nursing staff weren't able to lift this huge bag. And so a lot of what was happening is double bagging it and dragging it across the floor. And so Moxi's arm is actually pretty lightweight arm. It's not like a manipulating arm in a car factory that can pick up hundreds of pounds at a time. It can carry about 5 pounds at a time. But if you're talking about pushing or dragging something, the robot can carry a lot more. The mobile base can carry 100 kilograms. So, we found a way to have Moxi grab onto the linen bags and drag them to the soil room.
I think it's a great example of just how that observation in the clinical setting led you to the conclusion about here's a solution that we could probably provide, keeping our patients safe and realizing efficiencies in the hospital at a time when money's tight. So really freeing nurses up to spend that time with patients is the solution that I see that Moxi might be able to provide.
Like you're saying, there's so many opportunities for technology and innovation to help nurses focus on practicing at the top of their licensure. One of the things that we've noticed about the kinds of logistical tasks that Moxi's able to take on is that it's, on the one hand, Moxi running a specimen to the lab instead of a nurse is directly saving that 15 minutes that you didn't have to do it. But also, there's something about the continuity of your work and not being continually interrupted with little tasks and little fetching that has to happen. That's one of the things that we've heard from the nurses that work alongside Moxi is that some of that provides a little more continuity in their clinical practice. And so that in and of itself gives you a little more space to feel in control and that you're not bouncing between a lot of different things. If we can start to anticipate some of those needs, those are the kind of opportunities that become really exciting. We're just kind of scratching the surface of some of that.
Well, based on the early work that you did at my organization, you calculated out the hours returned per staff member based on the work that Moxie did. And you helped us calculate the return on investment using Moxie to pick up those tasks that don't require skilled nurses to do them.
If Moxie's able to do 80 to 100 delivery tasks in a day, that turns into about $1,000 a day of return on investment in terms of that nursing staff time that you've saved. You've been able to reallocate $1,000 worth of nursing time towards more valuable patient care. So that's $30,000 a month.
It's probably out of the realm of possibility for every hospital to go out and hire its own engineering team and stand up its own robotics system. But you scale that by working with companies who provide that to multiple clients so that you spread the costs over multiple facilities and you really help out the whole healthcare system and the professions that deliver healthcare. Thinking about innovation and what it means, to me, I think innovation is where you take an idea and that idea becomes a way of doing things in a new way. At its essence, that's innovation for me. And having a robust infrastructure that supports the application of evidence-based practice to delivery of patient care and to have research programs that solidly address clinical issues that impact nurses and the people that they serve is part of the innovation culture that chief nursing officers in magnet organizations are responsible for creating. The technology, as it makes staff experience better and patient experience better, really becomes transformational. I think that's key to thinking about innovation, is that it's freeing that nurse up to do human-centered caring while someone else does tasks that don't require that human touch. I've always been a big believer in leading by example. So I want others to see my example of partnering with outside of industry leaders and thinkers and engineers and bringing it into the hospital or the healthcare system and applying it. At Cedars-Sinai, we have a pretty robust structure set up for any nurse who has an idea about either a research project or a quality improvement project. So generating ideas, capturing them is so important to the process, and finding ways to do that, I think, is innovation itself. So there's really a lot of encouragement around innovation.
In my career, I've always had a very big focus on research and innovation. So I come from an academic background where everything you're doing is trying to create something new in the world that hasn't been done before. You're trying to create some new piece of knowledge and some new understanding and get it out into the world. What's been really interesting to me is translating that to everything else that has to happen to really make it a viable solution for end users like nurses. We started to realize that it was really important not just to interact with our client sites, but to really bring that expertise in-house. We've had nurses on our advisory board. We have had nurses join us as consultants. And at one point, we even had a nurse as a full-time employee as we were getting installed with our first major flagship customer. So we're at the stage of the technology that it's a blank page that we can write. And I think that's a really exciting place to be.
David Marshall is the Senior Vice President and Chief Nursing Executive at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, California, and pioneer for one of the first maker health spaces in the country. Andrea Tomas is the CEO and co-founder of Diligent Robotics, an AI company creating robot assistants that help healthcare workers with routine tasks based in Austin, Texas. Nurses are critical to optimizing quality of patient care, improving care outcomes, and improving efficiency. And no matter how advanced they become, robots don't take care of people. People take care of people. We need to do more to give time back to nurses, and robot assistants can help do this. This time will enable nurses to focus on continuous patient care where they can apply their deep knowledge and expertise, as well as practice self-care and innovate and problem solve. The story we share today is also a fabulous example of nurses innovatively collaborating with others outside of nursing to improve healthcare. And it's a great example of why nurses should be full partners with other health professionals in redesigning healthcare here in the United States. As David proves, making space for nurses to partner with engineers, roboticists, and other professions outside of nursing can have far-reaching and unexpected impacts on where and how innovation happens, and exponentially expands the potential for innovation to flourish. For See You Now, I'm Linda Benton. Thanks for listening.
Johnson & Johnson is proud to power up nurse-led innovation that is transforming health outcomes through skill building, leadership development, and more. The American Nurses Association ignites and celebrates nurse-led innovation to redefine quality nursing and advance healthcare for all. Learn more at seeyounowpodcast.com.